Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with a discussion about the Lizardmen rework in patch 6.3 for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Out of the two races that have gotten an update in 6.3, I would probably say that Tomb Kings ended up in a better position as a race. Though, to be fair, I think they were in a better position for all of their issues than the Lizardmen. One of the problems of Lizardmen is the jungle, and that's one of the bigger changes that Creative Assembly has implemented in this patch. They've reduced the jungle movement penalty by 50%. Why exactly they didn't remove it completely, that's a different discussion. But here's the problem with the jungle. It's not just the movement range in the jungle, it's just how it's designed. Lots of settlements that act as choke points, lots of bugs, lots of issues. Just Lustria in general is really poorly designed, and a lot of jungle areas are very poorly designed for camping gameplay. So it is an improvement, make no mistake on that, but I do think that they do need to do an overhaul completely with regards to the jungle. A very significant change for the Lizardmen is that Mazdamundi now has -20 diplomatic relations with many factions. Okay, forget that joke. It actually has to do with their lords and heroes and the skill lines for those lords and heroes. One of the things to be said about Slan Mage Priests is that they now have different traits. There's been a pretty substantial trait overhaul for lords and heroes, or generic ones, in the game. So for instance, with Slan Mage Priests, you can get 2nd generation, 3rd generation, 4th generation, and they will have different traits dependent on the generation. So 4th generation is good against chaos, 3rd generation has a significant experience boost for armies and characters, and 2nd generation are just good as magic users. So some changes with respect to that, though I believe the skill line does remain largely the same. And I don't think Slan Mage Priests are the best leaders for your armies even so. You do get Soul Quench for Mazdamundi, however. And in terms of your heroes, you do get some pretty substantial skill overhauls available for your heroes. Crucially, you get these minor blessings. Now, there's all kinds of pros and cons with these blessings, but really, Saurus upkeep is ultimately going to end up being the most beneficial of these, because you can have a good amount of heroes, especially if you're playing, say, Nakai. You can get a lot of heroes as Nakai and just stack that upkeep benefit to afford cheaper armies as the Lizardmen with Saurus, who can really make up the mainstay of your armies, which should be revealing about some of the changes that CA has made. Yes, there's been a bunch of changes to buildings, research, etc., but really you're still going to end up using a lot of Saurus because they're just effective. High leadership, pretty decent armor, relatively easy to recruit, and if you reduce their upkeep, you can end up affording more armies than you would otherwise. And being able to do so, especially in an environment like the jungle where your movement range is restricted and terraining is, well, let's just put it questionable at best, downright awful at worst, or unplayable at worst, really. Having multiple armies that can deal with various things effectively enough, not the best armies in the world, but effectively enough, is important. So that's one of the problems of the Lizardmen, and it does carry over. So you would use a lot of Saurus beforehand with limited armies and try and make that work. You're still using a lot of Saurus, and Saurus Old Bloods are still really the better army leaders that are available because you get that plus 20% upkeep. Speaking about traits, so you do get that minus 20% upkeep from Saurus Old Bloods, but now you stack it with hero traits, you kind of get where I'm going with regards to that. Another substantial change with the Lizardmen is the introduction of the spawning sequence. So blessed units are much easier to acquire right now for the Lizardmen than they were before. Here's how it works. You have various ways of getting spawning sequence, and you can spend it on any blessed spawning unit that you want to. You can have up to 2 in the pool, and there's a 10-turn cooldown on getting these. So for instance, let's say, I want some Temple Guard over here just as an example. I spend my spawning essence for 100 over there. And now, if we look at the cooldown, it is a 10-turn cooldown for these units to get them again. But this means you have a lot more flexibility in terms of your armies, because you can just recruit a lord, send him on a merry chase around the map, and then just recruit an entire army on that lord. Works especially well with Nakai, again, because he can get a lot of heroes as well, and he can get global recruitment of heroes in his horde army. So don't get me wrong, Nakai's campaign still has a lot of issues, but he does have that very tangible benefit in his campaign. In fact, he might just be the best Lizardmen campaign to play in some ways right now, at least from that perspective of flexibility. Just campaign flexibility, terrain flexibility. He's not teleporting around as Axiatl is, but he has a lot more tools available than the other Lizardmen do have. Haven't checked out Tenuin's campaign. I did play Tic-Tac-Toe, I did play Gorak, I did play a bunch of campaigns if I look at the list of things over here. Yeah, just a bit of Be'lakor, just to, you know, get some vision and see the new dialogue over there with Wolfric and the like. But yeah, I've played Gorak, I've played Mazdamundi, Tic-Tac-Toe, Nakai. We'll get to him in just a bit. So, you do have those blessed units, which combine the regiment's renown. Yeah, you can recruit armies on the fly. So, it can be a bit ridiculous, admittedly, recruiting an entire army on the move, but in essence, this was one of the key strengths of Axiatl, because he could get more blessed units than everyone else combined, and then just teleport around the map. Now, you don't have the teleportation available with the other Lizardmen, but you do have the ability of just sending a lord to a location and spawning an entire doom stack with that. Because these units, they're powerful, and you're looking at things like Blessed Carnosaur. Sure, getting a huge amount of spawning sequence is difficult, because there's only a handful of ways of earning it. There's a couple of missions that will give you something like 100. Nakai can get, I think, 20 through various actions he does have in his campaign. And outside of that, for instance, you have missions like for 150, for instance, right here. And I believe I had another one for 100. So you have some missions. You do have a commandment, the Alignment of War, that gives you 4 per turn per province. Not especially great. I don't believe you can earn it from any structure if I'm looking at the situation. And yeah, it's kind of weird. You still have Unicaps or Dread Saurians, but to be honest, it's kind of fluff with Dread Saurians. It's just a better way to use resources to get more armies than even recruiting a single one of these, considering the freaking cost. Though it's appreciated that they've changed some of the unit tiers, but we'll get to that in a second. The other way you get spawning sequence, and really the main way you get spawning sequence, is through the Rite of Awakening. Rites have been changed to some extent. I would say like Tomb King's got a bigger benefit right here, because you do still have some fairly long cooldowns with like Rite of Primeval Glory. I would prefer a short cooldown, even if it meant a weaker army. But yeah, Rite of Sotic, Rite of Ferocity, and Rite of Awakening now gives you 100 spawning sequence, and gives you a random generation of Slan when you use it. I don't think it matters what school of magic you're using, though I did get the 3rd generation Slan with Death for what that's worth. I've struggled to get it elsewhere, but it depends on... I think there's some RNG, there's a significant RNG factor with regards to that, but that's how you gain spawning sequence. Beyond that, what CA has changed is with regards to structures and the availability of units and heroes from those structures, as well as some economic changes. So economically speaking, a lot of resource buildings are now going to generate extra money, so you're going to get a bit of an income benefit. It's still a limited economy that's going to struggle to maintain the number of armies and the units, expensive units that you do have in the Lizardmen roster to work very effectively. So it's still a problem, but economy is a bit better. More substantially, though, with regards to structures, is you no longer need specific structures for certain units. You get the recruitment building for a unit, you can recruit that unit. You no longer have that specific limitation. That's kind of make the weapons crafter commune somewhat worthless. I mean, local recruitment capacity, sure, all well and good, but given the fact that Lizardmen do have multiple structures they want to build to make their economy work, like they need geomantic pylon beyond their regular economic building, they have other things they might want to go for, like star chambers. So there's certain problems still. It's an update. It is I would consider it a rework, but it's not a major rework. It's a smaller rework, still a rework, still beneficial on that subject. Then unit tiers have, or building tiers have been reduced to a degree, though not as much as I would prefer. So for instance, if we're looking at the building chains of advanced military buildings, we now have a skink priest that can be recruited at tier 2, increased capacity at tier 3, skink oracles at tier 3 recruitment, and capacity increase at tier 4. This means you will actually be able to use those heroes far more often in a campaign. You do still have the problem with Scar veterans unless you're playing Nakai or you're playing Krokgar, who I believe can get these guys much, much earlier in his campaign. But you do have more hero availability in general, and unit recruitment availability in general, I would say, in a campaign compared to where you had it before. The legendary lords themselves have largely stayed the same, however, in their campaigns. While the race in itself is better, the actual campaign behind the race, the campaigns you can play as the Lizardmen race, those have not necessarily been improved. You're going to benefit from the racial rework. You're not necessarily going to have a better campaign experience, though, with the individual legendary lords. Poor Mazdamundi. Actually, poor Lizardmen in general. Just understand it took billions of Skaven and the destruction of a moon to defeat them in the end times. Actually, I think the Skaven lost, quote unquote, against the Lizardmen in the end times. Then they kind of threw a temper tantrum and destroyed the moon because they were not winning, despite throwing billions of Skaven at the problem. They could not defeat them in Leicester. So, bit disappointing the way that Lizardmen have always been portrayed in Total War Warhammer, be it Warhammer 2 or Warhammer 3. Okay, so structures, construction times have been improved in some ways. Buildings should be constructed a bit faster, though I would say that's mostly because of research. Keep in mind that one of the reasons Old Bloods, that's a Crocscar, one of the reasons Old Bloods are so good is you can also get the Blessing of Kotek, which gives you a construction time -1 turn for provincial capital settlement buildings. If there is a criticism I have with the Lizardmen, it's the fact that baseline stats are not great, but you do have a bunch of modifiers that can improve them, but it just adds to just management things that end up being annoying. Kind of reminds me of Pharaoh, Total War Pharaoh, and not necessarily in the best way, because, like, here's the thing. Total War Pharaoh has a lot of systems, but it's just kind of a situation like, oh, here's a modifier on top of a modifier on top of a modifier to make things work. That's not a great gameplay experience. I appreciate having a bunch of things to worry about, but it's like income modifier, construction modifier is just not really a great system from my perspective on that subject. Now, the most substantial change that Lizardmen have gotten is with their research tree. Nakai has also gotten an updated research tree. I'll get into that in just a moment. But we do have the Great Plan, and we have Cold-Blooded. Cold-Blooded gives you a whole bunch of military benefits over here. So, for instance, you've got Guardian Saurus, Beasts, Skinks, etc., and Cavalry, as much as you care to use Cavalry as a Lizardman. I mean, it's actually pretty decent, all things considered. But yeah, you do get a bunch of benefits over here, but you're probably going to be spending a lot of time in the Great Plan tree, where you have spawning, so recruit rank, Lord recruit rank, increases amount of spawning, sequence by 5%, which is not especially great considering how limited spawning sequence is to gain for the Lizardmen, so maybe not something to worry about. Order starts with control, but then gives you a bunch of research benefits, income from ports, construction from ports. Giving you vision with factions that you have trade agreements with? Yeah. You took that from the High Elves, gave it to Jan Bo, and now the Lizardmen have it as well for research. That's just fantastic, CA. We do have War, which gives us campaign movement range, reinforcement range, casualty replenishment, income from looting, sacking, and raising settlements, casualties captured post-battle, income from post-battle loot. We do have some technologies locked behind certain buildings, but there's only 4 of them. So this is not really an issue, and they're not necessarily the most important things, though having stock for all heroes can be damn useful. Or wound recovery time, for instance. Some of these are useful, but they do cost money, and they're not instantly researched, worth pointing out. But then the main tree is creation. So creation gives you a whole bunch of benefits in terms of construction time and construction cost. Now, not everything here is worth it. You can get determining the Great Plan, which gives you replenishment of campaign movement range after winning a battle, as well as removing climate penalties if you get the Temple Citadel provincial capital. That's a tier 5 provincial capital, so it can make it worth it to invest a lot of time, resources, and energy to get the tier 5 capital if you want to, if it has some great landmarks in bad climate, but generally speaking, I wouldn't say that's worth it. However, replenishing campaign movement range is. You do get 10%, as I said, then replenishing 10%, and then you also have the ability of getting 5% on top of that. But the main thing here is you can reduce construction time for certain buildings, star chambers, and sequence of construction, reducing it for provincial capital settlement buildings, as well as other things. 100% income from mines and quarries, so more resource benefits right there. Sequence of the artisan, so like at the top you do have these sequences that give you a bunch of construction costs, reduction, bit of campaign movement range, treatable resource, all that kind of stuff, and ending up with the geomantic nexus and plus free control. So it is a much better research tree. It's no longer locked behind getting a whole bunch of buildings and really awkward research trees. It's substantially better than where it was before. It works far better. I don't necessarily care too much about the military benefits, given the fact that, you know, the civil benefits, the campaign benefits are going to outpace that. Especially getting like -1 construction time for provincial capitals, given the fact that Lizardmen have slower construction. So for instance, and I think it might just be bugged, I'm not entirely certain, so for instance, like, you know, a tier 3 settlement right here, minor settlement, takes 5 turns of provincial capital, takes 5 turns at the higher tier. Though there is also a commandment to keep in mind right there that is affecting that. So there is a commandment that does have an effect on construction time. So just worth keeping that aspect in mind, because you can reduce construction time for all buildings by one turn, and that stacks with the benefit of Asara's Old Blood skill line, and it's stacks with the sequence of construction. So you can improve construction speed, but modifier on top of a modifier on top of a modifier. Could we just have faster construction for buildings for Lizardmen CA? Just pointing out, would be better. Just my perspective on that subject with regards to how the Lizardmen do work. Overall, it is a much better spot that they're in, but I do think Creative Assembly needs to do more with them. I think they need to improve the jungle situation. Would I say they're a much better experience? They are better. I've certainly enjoyed them more, but we also need uniqueness to legendary lords like Mazdamundi, Krakar, for instance, Gorak. Just having unique campaign mechanics, and also some fixes like for Tenno and all that kind of stuff. But it is a step in the right direction. But just a step, there's more that could be done. And yeah, nothing for the geomantic web, though commandments just seem to work better. But it's just that tedium of management. Like, if you're playing Lizardmen, you're probably going to be switching commandments a lot between, say, growth to construction time to alignment of war, when you're not constructing stuff and you're not worrying about growth. It's just a tedious experience to be dealing with that situation. Now, as for Nakai, looking at his research tree over here, it is also overhauled, though we do keep most of the stuff that made him strong to begin with. So we do have the Scales of War, where at the top we can increase army capacity and then unlock 2 other things, depend on where we're at. So we can get things like campaign movement range for the sake of Old One's favor in his campaign. Some of these things are expensive, undeniably so, but they're also pretty damn powerful, though. Keep in mind, Nakai does have limited armies, but he doesn't have limited heroes. That's actually one of the main strengths, because he can get a ridiculous amount of heroes that he can pick up in his campaign. Like, for instance, if we look at the situation, he can get horde armies that recruit every hero type and even increase capacity for these. And then we also have the situation where he can use the temples of the Old Ones to also increase hero capacity and unlock recruitment of all the hero types over here globally. So, for instance, in this campaign, I've got Gorok right here, and he's got 2 heroes that I recruited through that global recruitment right there for him, even though he doesn't have the structures in his horde army to recruit things. But otherwise, when we're looking at this, yes, all kinds of benefits right here, you know, for guardians, for skirmishers, for cavalry, for beasts right here that we do have with respect to these units. So like recruit rank, vigor loss reduction for these kind of units. In some ways better, some ways missing out on certain things, but overall a strong research tree. And we do have the Horde expanse right here with the various sequences that increases your tribute from your vassal, the Defenders of the Great Plan, increases horde growth, all kinds of different benefits, but this is how you improve your economy in a Nakai campaign, because your vassal can generate a pretty decent level economy. The larger you are, the more money you're going to get from them, because they have this building that generates a pretty good amount of cash. And also, with Nakai, when you're looking at some of these things, you can spawn blessed units. And those blessed units that you spawn for Nakai do also give you spawning sequence. So you're kind of double dipping with regards to that. Maybe Nakai... Well, I suspect Axial still has the most amount of blessed units just because of his mission rewards. Though I have to see how those things may have changed. But all the same, Nakai has certainly ended up benefiting quite a bit from this patch. That's all I had to say. Costin signing out. Stay tuned for more. Not my favorite race still, though part of that, a big part of that is the jungle situation in general that affects all campaigns. I do still think it's freaking ridiculous that the best races to deal with the jungle are not the Lizardmen. Like, Skaven are much better at dealing with jungle. Dwarves are better at dealing with greenskins, ogres. Any race that has underway is going to navigate and handle the jungle substantially better than the Lizardmen. To me, that's just frankly ridiculous. Stay tuned for more.